Welcome back to the deep dive. Now, I want you to think for a second. When was the last time you saw, say, British beef really promoted? At a fancy butcher or a steakhouse.
Hmm.
You see Australian, definitely American, maybe some special stuff from South America. But UK beef.
Yeah, it's kind of faded from that premium global market, hasn't it, over the last, 10, 20 years?
Exactly. And okay, let's unpack this because it's not just some market trend. This absence, it's the direct fallout from one of the most uh, intense and, frankly, terrifying medical investigations in modern history.
Absolutely. It was a crisis that literally forced scientists to write, whole new types of diseases into the textbooks.
We're talking about bovine spongiform encephalopathy, right? BSE.
That's the one, BSE. First spotted, officially at least, in the UK back in 1986. And the sources we looked at, they show the scale was just staggering.
Staggering how?
Well, by the time they really grasped what was happening, it's estimated the public had already eaten meat from maybe 250,000 infected animals. Unknowingly, of course.
250,000.
Yeah. So this deep dive, it's really about tracking that forensic investigation, that hunt for the cause, and how it exposed this sort of biological vortex created by modern farming practices.
Right. So our mission today is to trace this whole dramatic story. We'll start with a really strange animal case that kind of kicked things off and follow the clues from, the farm to the lab to the dinner plate and ultimately get to the science, the unexpected kind of frightening science behind it all.
Okay, let's do it.
So let's start the clock back in 1986. We're in Southampton in the UK. And the first kind of official weird animal case wasn't even on a farm. It was at the local zoo.
That's right, yeah. The animal involved was a nyla. It's a sort of deer-like creature.
Okay.
And the symptoms were, well, deeply unsettling. The reports describe this intense, uncontrollable shaking, not just the body, but the head specifically.
Just shaking.
Shaking, plus increased aggression, real restlessness, and then it just stopped eating altogether. The vets there were, frankly, baffled. The diagnostic tools they had back then, 40 years ago, just couldn't pin down what was causing this rapid neurological breakdown.
So what happened?
Well, the animal eventually died, and crucially, its brain tissue got sent off to a central veterinary lab just outside London.
And that's where they found something.
That's where the penny dropped. Under the microscope, the scientists saw brain tissue that was just profoundly wrong. Instead of the usual dense packing of neural cells, the whole structure was like riddled with tiny holes. Empty channels.
Holes?
Yeah, exactly. It looked for all the world like a sponge.
A sponge, wow.
And that spongiform pattern, that was the first big clue because scientists immediately thought of a disease they already knew, but only in sheep. It's called scrapie.
Scrapie, why is it called that?
Well, sheep with scrapie show similar neurological issues, aggression, but also this very distinct behavior where they compulsively rub or scrape themselves against fences, walls, anything. Scrapes. Scrapie.
Okay. Makes sense.
But finding a scrapie-like disease, this spongiform change, in an Ayala, that was unheard of. There should have been a species barrier preventing that jump. It was really, really worrying.
Okay, so a mystery at the zoo, but things didn't stop there, right?
No, not at all. While the lab team was wrestling with this Nyala brain, another sample arrived. This time it was from a farm, brain tissue from a cow.
And the cow had shown similar signs.
Exactly the same pattern. Aggression, the shaking, refusing to eat, and then eventual death.
So they looked at the cow's brain under the microscope.
And bingo, same fatal signature. The spongiform holes were there. But also, critically, they saw these specific fibrous structures, these little clumps.
Fibrous clumps?
Yeah, what we now know are amyloid fibers, basically sticky tangles of misfolded proteins. And these fibers were also found in the brains of sheep that had died from scrapie.
Okay, so the link was getting stronger.
Undeniable. This confirmed it was a new brain disease in cattle. They named it bovine spongiform encephalopathy, BSU, and the working theory, straight away, pointed back to scrapie in sheep.
But here's where it gets even stranger,
Yeah.
right? Because the initial farm survey started showing something odd.
Yeah, the disease wasn't just popping up randomly in all cattle. It seemed to be concentrated almost exclusively in dairy cows, the classic black and white spotted ones.
Right. Not the beef cattle so much.
Not nearly as much, especially early on. Beef cattle often just graze on grass and fields. But dairy cows, their lives were different. So the big question became, what are dairy cows getting that beef cows aren't?
Okay, so what was different about dairy cows in the UK back then around 86?
Well, you have to understand the agricultural context. The UK was pushing really hard to be a major player in the European dairy market. Milk, cheese, butter, export, export,
Okay,
export.
it's big business.
Huge business. And to get the highest possible milk yields from these cows, they needed a massive amount of protein in their diet. Way more than they could get just from grazing on grass.
So specialized feed.
Exactly. High protein, specialized feed designed to maximize milk production.
So what was in this feed? Initially, I guess things like soy meal.
Yeah, they started with things like soy meal to boost protein, but the industry was always looking for, a bigger boost, more efficiency, higher yields, more profit, and they found what seemed like the ultimate solution: processed animal remains.
Processed animal remains.
Meat and bone meal, MBM. It was basically rendered down carcasses from slaughterhouses. And protein-wise, it was far superior to soy. Milk yield shot up. It looked like a win-win from a purely production standpoint.
Okay, I think I see where this is going. This MBM, it was made from all sorts of animal carcasses.
That's the critical and terrifying part, yes. It wasn't just cattle remains. It was cows, chickens, pigs, sheep, everything rendered down together. So if a single sheep infected with scrapie went to the slaughterhouse,
Its brain and spinal cord, the infected parts, would get rendered down, concentrated, and mixed into these MBM pellets, fed primarily to dairy cows.
oh, wow.
It essentially turned what might have been a very low risk from occasional scrap feeding into a centralized industrial-scale delivery system for the infectious agent.
So that explains the source. A scrapie infected sheep gets into the feed, infects a cow, but how did it spread so incredibly fast? You mentioned 250,000 estimated infections. That's not just one sheep.
Exactly, you've nailed the key insight. The system didn't just transmit the disease, it amplified it.
Yeah.
It created this horrifying feedback loop, this biological vortex.
A vortex. How?
Think about it. One infected sheep contaminates some MBM, maybe infects one dairy cow,
Right, okay.
but when that infected cow eventually finishes its dairy production life and goes to slaughter,
Right.
its carcass, its infected brain and spinal cord get rendered down back into MBM.
Oh, no!
So now you have much more concentrated infectious material going back into the feed supply. That batch might infect, say, 10 more cows.
And when they go to slaughter, their remains go back into the MBM, potentially infecting 100 cows, then 1,000. It's exponential growth driven by recycling the infectious agent back into the feed. That's how you go from a few dozen cases to over 1,300 very, very quickly.
That is horrifying.
Yeah.
An industrial loop of infection.
Precisely. But even understanding this mechanism, there was huge pushback initially. Politically, scientifically.
People didn't believe it.
Well, the Minister of Agriculture at the time, he questioned it publicly. His argument, and it sounded reasonable on the surface, was, look, scrapie's been in sheep for centuries, maybe 250 years. Humans have eaten infected sheep for all that time with no apparent problems. Why would it suddenly jump to cows now and spread like wildfire?
Yeah, that species jump was the scary part, even if the vortex explained the speed.
Absolutely. So the initial government response around 1989 was to downplay it. Public statements insisted the risk to humans was, and I quote, very remote.
Wasn't there that infamous incident with the agriculture minister and his daughter?
Ah, yes. John Gummer. He actually staged a press event feeding his own young daughter a beef burger on camera,
Wow.
all to publicly demonstrate that beef is safe. A very bold, very public statement.
But what was happening behind the scenes policy-wise?
And this is where the trust just evaporated. Almost immediately after that public burger-eating stunt, the government quietly brought in a new rule.
The word real.
A ban on using specific high-risk cattle parts, brain, spinal cord, certain nervous tissues in the human food chain, especially in things like ground meat, burgers, sausages.
So publicly saying it's safe while privately banning the riskiest bits.
Exactly. That contradiction just shattered public confidence. People felt lied to.
I can imagine. And the economic impact.
Devastating. Almost overnight, sales of British beef and dairy just plummeted. People stopped buying it. And then neighboring countries in Europe, Germany, France, Belgium, they weren't buying the reassurances either. They started banning imports of UK beef altogether.
So the economic pressure was immense.
Staggering on the entire farming sector.
Okay, so the MBM theory explained the spread in cows. The government was flip-flopping. But then the situation got even worse, didn't it? The species barrier didn't just wobble, it collapsed.
It completely collapsed. The next shockwave hit when reports started coming in about domestic cats.
Cats.
Yeah. Vets were seeing cats dying from a similar spongiform encephalopathy. The thinking was they likely got it from eating, raw scraps of contaminated beef. They called it mad cat disease.
Mad cat disease. So it wasn't just cows anymore.
Nope. It proved the agent could jump again. And it wasn't just cats. It started showing up in zoo animals, too. Lions, other big cats, even deer animals that had also been fed feed containing MBM. The disease was clearly moving through the mammalian food chain.
This must have caused absolute panic.
It forced the Ministry of Health's hand. They'd set up a special surveillance unit, and soon it started reporting human cases, and these were just terrifying.
Human cases of BSE.
A variant form, yes. What was shocking was the age of the victims. We're talking young people, 19, 21, 24, 30 years old. They were developing rapidly progressive dementia, hallucinations, terrible tremors, symptoms usually seen only in the very elderly.
And autopsies.
Confirmed the worst. Their brains showed the same spongiform changes seen in the cows. Holes. Destroyed tissue.
Oh my God, so they could link it directly.
The final awful confirmation came from lab tests. Scientists analyzed those fibrous protein clumps, the amyloid fibrils, from the brains of these young human victims.
Ooh.
They were chemically identical to the fibrils found in the brains of cows with BSE. The proof was undeniable. The disease had jumped from cows to humans through contaminated food.
So the government had to admit it.
They had no choice. The public messaging shifted completely. The horrifying truth was out. Mad cow disease can kill you.
Just devastating. And all this tragedy, it actually led to a fundamental scientific discovery, didn't it? About what this infectious thing actually was.
Yes, it was revolutionary, biologically speaking. The culprit wasn't a virus or bacteria or any kind of parasite we understood. It was something entirely new. A misfolded protein. They called it a prion.
A protein. Not alive? How can a protein be infectious?
It's bizarre, right? Pions are actually normal proteins we all have in our brains.
Yeah.
But the problem starts when one of these prion proteins somehow misfolds into an abnormal shape.
Okay.
Once it's misfolded, it acts like a bad influence. It bumps into its normal, healthy neighbors and forces them to misfold into the same wrong shape.
Like a chain reaction.
Exactly. A self-replicating chain reaction of protein misfolding. These abnormal prions then clump together, forming those sticky, fibrous plaques we talked about.
And those plaques destroy the brain tissue, create the holes.
That's right. They physically disrupt and kill the neurons, leading to the sponge-like appearance and the devastating neurological symptoms. And crucially, the research showed that the original scrapey prion from sheep must have slightly changed its shape, its conformation, when it jumped into cattle.
Making it more dangerous.
Making it more virulent, yes. This new bovine form of the prion was suddenly capable of making that further leap into cats, and tragically, into humans.
So, with the cause identified and human deaths confirmed, what was the final solution? How did the UK deal with this massive contamination?
They had to resort to what many called the nuclear option. There was simply no way to test millions of cows reliably or cure infected ones. A total compulsory slaughter program. Every single herd potentially exposed had to be culled. Between 1990 and the year 2000, estimates suggest around 4.4 million cattle were slaughtered and destroyed.
4.4 million cows.
An unimaginable number. The economic cost alone was just staggering, estimated somewhere between 10 and 12 billion pounds sterling.
Billions.
Billions. And that ban on UK beef exports we mentioned at the start. In many key markets, it lasted for well over a decade, some closer to 2 decades, which explains why you don't see it featured prominently today.
So, wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway here? What does this whole BSE crisis tell us?
Well, I mean, on one level, it's a terrifying example of how industrial agriculture, when focused purely on efficiency and profit in this case, recycling animal protein to boost milk yields can unintentionally create the perfect conditions for a catastrophe.
Yeah, that biological vortex idea, taking a rare disease and amplifying it exponentially.
Exactly. It turned a localized problem into a national and then international public health nightmare, ultimately killing people.
And scientifically.
Scientifically, it was a paradigm shift. BSE and the human form VCJD fundamentally changed our understanding of infectious disease. It introduced the world of prions.
Right, this idea of an infectious agent that isn't even alive in the traditional sense, just a rogue protein.
Precisely. It showed us that a pathogen doesn't need DNA or RNA to replicate and cause fatal disease. That was, and still is, a revolutionary concept in biology.
So here's a final thought to leave our listeners with. This whole crisis, this global panic, the billions in cost the human lives lost, it all hinged on what seemed like a small, efficiency-driven change in animal feed, using MBM for protein recycling to maximize profit.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, what common, maybe seemingly harmless element in our food supply chain today, something designed for efficiency or profit, could be silently setting the stage for the next slow-burning, maybe invisible health crisis?
Yeah.
One we won't fully understand until it's potentially too late.
That's the unsettling question, isn't it? What are we overlooking now?